What happened to the thousands of UN peacekeepers in Mali who were asked to leave the country? Earlier this year, Mali ordered the UN peacekeeping mission to exit the country as soon as possible. Under Colonel Assimi Goïta, Mali took this action to free the country from any Western troops. However, instead of following orders, UN peacekeepers stayed in the country. Despite the UN voting, they were in no mood to leave. That's when Colonel Goïta decided to use his powers to ensure that every UN troop left the country. And guess what? As of the latest news, the UN peacekeeping mission has officially completed its withdrawal. But this has exposed what they were doing in Mali and the real numbers of troops, which are many times more than we were told before. So, what did Mali do to the UN peacekeepers that made the news? Let's find that out. This is the story of Mali using its power over all Western countries and the United Nations. So, how did all this started? Earlier this year, protesters in Mali gathered in the capital, Bamako, demanding the withdrawal of the UN peacekeeping mission, MINUSMA, or United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali. Organized by the M5 RFP party and civil society groups, the demonstrators expressed dissatisfaction, holding signs and calling for the withdrawal of the UN mission. The rally, held at the Palais des Sports Arena, was led by supporters of the transitional military government. According to protester Abdoulaye Diarra, the UN mission was perceived as an evil force that had proven ineffective and needed to leave the country. Despite initial optimism about the arrival of the UN peacekeeping force, many Malians considered UN soldiers part of the problem rather than a solution. Criticisms include the mission's alleged failure to protect the population and its perceived inaction during massacres near UN compounds. Established in 2013 to support foreign and local troops against armed groups linked to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, MINUSMA has become the largest, costliest, and deadliest UN mission in history, with over 14,000 troops on the ground. While millions of Malians in regions with limited government presence still rely on the UN's mission for security, recent tensions between the Malian military government and MINUSMA have escalated. This tension is partly attributed to Mali seeking assistance from the Wagner Group, a private Russian mercenary firm linked to the Kremlin. During the protest, demonstrators were observed waving Russian flags. Mohamed Kassoum Jiré, president of the organization Sentinelles Malikoura, declared, MINUSMA must leave Mali because the Malian people and the government have been awaiting results from MINUSMA for 10 years. He criticized MINUSMA for allegedly undermining the credibility of the Malian army instead of cooperating with authorities and the Malian people, viewing the army as the backbone and symbol of national unity. Jiré quoted a UN report accusing the Malian army and its Russian auxiliaries of executing over 500 civilians in Moura village during an operation in March 2022. He defended the action, stating, "Everyone knows that Moura was a sanctuary for terrorists." In general, relations between Europe and Mali have deteriorated since the 2020 military coup, with the government inviting fighters from the Wagner Group to assist in the fight against rebels. This decision prompted France to withdraw its troops from Mali in 2022 after almost a decade of involvement. The Mali government has consistently asserted that Russian forces in the West African country are not mercenaries, but trainers, assisting local troops with equipment purchased from Moscow. In a previous interview with Al Jazeera, Prime Minister Maiga criticized the UN mission, stating, "The international community became involved in Mali following the adoption of a UN resolution in 2013. Malians understood that it was to bring an end to the war, but as soon as the peace accord was signed, the resolution was changed to say that they weren't here to end the war, but to protect the peace. But there is no peace." But did the public only want UN peacekeepers to exit? Well, the sentiments had been set, and the military junta had its hand on the public's pulse. Mali formally urged the United Nations to swiftly withdraw its peacekeeping mission from the country, criticizing the mission, known as MINUSMA, for its failure to address security challenges effectively. Abdoulaye Diop, Mali's foreign minister and a member of the interim military authorities, communicated this request during a UN Security Council meeting on Friday. Diop stressed the need for MINUSMA to withdraw its troops from the West African nation. El Ghassim Wayne, the head of the UN mission in Mali, remarked after the council meeting that conducting UN peacekeeping operations becomes significantly challenging without the consent of the host country. Reporting from UN headquarters in New York City, Al Jazeera's Kristen Salumi mentioned that the mission's mandate is scheduled to expire at the end of the month. She highlighted the concerns voiced by the foreign minister, who pointed out that the UN had been in the country for a decade, and rather than improving, the violence and insecurity the mission aimed to address had worsened. According to the foreign minister, this deteriorating situation has resulted in a crisis of confidence among the people of Mali, leading to protests calling for the departure of UN peacekeepers. Foreign Minister Diop asserted that Mali's government calls for the swift withdrawal of MINUSMA, but is open to cooperation with the United Nations on the matter. He rejected all proposed options for changing the mission's mandate presented by the UN Secretary-General. In January, UN Chief Antonio Guterres put forth 3 options for amending the mission, ranging from an increase in personnel to a withdrawal of troops. Guterres recommended an intermediate solution in a report released earlier in the week, proposing a reconfiguration of the operation to focus on a limited number of priorities. Diop expressed concerns that MINUSMA has become part of the problem, exacerbating community tensions and fostering distrust among the population. These sentiments were heightened by serious allegations detailed in a recent UN High Commissioner for Human Rights report on an anti-rebel operation in Mora in March 2022. So, how did the UN respond to all this? The UN Security Council unanimously voted to immediately end its peacekeeping mission in Mali, complying with the demand of the country's military junta. That's the power we were talking about that Colonel Goita holds. Mali's military rulers, seeking to end the mission, had enlisted mercenaries from Russia's Wagner Group to counter an Islamic insurgency that the nation has grappled with for more than a decade. Goita made a strategic move by calling the Wagner mercenaries, thus making it impossible for the UN troops to continue carrying out their covert agendas. Situated in West Africa, Mali has experienced strained relations with the Western community, partially attributable to the junta's collaboration with Wagner mercenaries. The resolution, drafted by France and adopted with a 15-0 vote, terminated the peacekeeping mission's mandate, known as MINUSMA. It directed the mission to start the withdrawal of over 15,000 personnel starting Saturday, with completion expected by the end of the year. Jeffrey De Laurentiis, the U.S. Deputy Ambassador, expressed regret at the military government's decision to abandon the UN mission. He noted that some domestic actors in Mali were advocating for the harassment of peacekeepers and urged the mission to ensure the safe and orderly transfer of UN facilities and equipment to designated locations. British Ambassador Barbara Woodward lamented Mali's demand for peacekeepers to leave at a time of increasing instability and humanitarian needs in the region. She voiced skepticism about the partnership with the Wagner Group, asserting that it wouldn't offer long-term stability or security for the people of Mali. In Washington, John Kirby, the spokesman for the U.S. National Security Council, expressed profound concern about Wagner's destabilizing activities in Africa, particularly in Mali and the Central African Republic. Kirby cited U.S. information indicating that Mali's transition government had paid over $200 million to Wagner since late 2021, with no improvement in security. Instead, terror attacks and violent crime had risen in central Mali. Kirby further alleged that Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder of the Wagner Group, played a role in expediting the departure of UN peacekeepers to advance Wagner's interests. He claimed that senior Malian officials collaborated directly with Prigozhin's employees to inform the UN Secretary-General that Mali had revoked consent for the MINUSMA mission. But these claims are hard to believe, given that the UN mission itself had failed. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Following the vote, Diop, in an interview, noted that many Malians had requested the withdrawal, viewing the peacekeeping mission as a threat to our country. He clarified that this decision wasn't impulsive, but a result of the government's desire to take control of its affairs and strengthen its military and security forces. The support of governments is crucial for UN peacekeeping missions to operate. Russia's deputy UN ambassador, Anna Evstigneva, expressed Moscow's backing for the transitional government's aspiration to take full responsibility and play the leading role in stabilizing the Malian state. Russia pledged to continue providing comprehensive bilateral support to Mali to normalize the situation. Mali's UN ambassador Issa Komfuru addressed the council post-vote, acknowledging that while MINUSMA fell short of its fundamental goal to support the government's security efforts, the people and government in Mali commend its contributions to humanitarian and social assistance. But what has the UN peacekeeping mission done in Mali until now? Well, there are conflicting opinions on this. Some think it was successful, while others argue that it could not fulfill its objectives and orchestrated the internal atmosphere so that it created the need for the mission. Deployed to Mali in 2013 in response to a violent uprising by separatist rebels and a subsequent military coup, the UN Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali included over 15,000 troops and personnel stationed in cities and towns across the country. Reflecting on the mission's impact, El Ghasem Wayne, the outgoing special representative of the Secretary General and head of MINUSMA, remarked, "I think our work impacted the lives of many civilians in Mali." Recognizing MINUSMA's pivotal role, Mr. Guterres underscored its contributions to protecting civilians, supporting the peace process, ensuring respect for ceasefires, assisting in the transition, restoring state authority, and providing peace dividends to the population. But this type of praise has never come from officials in Mali, which shows that the mission was not as successful as it was portrayed. But what were the plans for the UN peacekeeping mission's withdrawal? To achieve this goal, MINUSMA developed an integrated withdrawal plan focused on ensuring the safety and security of UN personnel, meeting the December 31st deadline, preserving the mission's legacy, and creating an environment conducive to long-term UN engagement in Mali. Since July 3rd, MINUSMA has been gradually withdrawing its personnel and handing over control of its bases to Malian civilian authorities whenever possible. Over the past 6 months, MINUSMA has carried out personnel withdrawals under challenging security conditions. The liquidation period began later. During this phase, a reduced team in the rear parties of troop and police contributing countries remained at sites in Gao and Bamako to oversee the orderly transportation of assets and the proper disposal of UN-owned equipment, as stated by the UN spokesperson. While MINUSMA concludes its mission, the UN's presence will stay in Mali. UN funds, agencies, and programs were in Mali well before the deployment of MINUSMA and will stay in Mali well after the withdrawal, confirmed MINUSMA Chief Mr. Wayne. This is what becomes Goita's next plan: to get rid of all the UN organizations in Mali to make the country free of external influence. The entire UN system, including the 21 agencies, funds, and programs of the country team in Mali, in partnership with the UN Office for West Africa and the Sahel and the Special Coordinator for Development in the Sahel, will be in focus now. But what move did Colonel Goita make that kicked the UN troops out? United Nations peacekeepers initiated their withdrawal from 2 bases in northern Mali. It was hard to believe how the withdrawal was being executed. Then, it turned out that Colonel Goita increased cooperation with the Wagner Group to force the UN troops out, potentially calling in more mercenaries. This was like standing an army before the UN troops. Therefore, the UN peacekeeping mission had no option but to wrap up its 10-year deployment in Mali. On December 31st, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres announced the successful completion of MINUSMA's agreed withdrawal. So, what happened most recently that has made the news? Well, until now, the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Mali was in the final stages of withdrawing from the country this Sunday. Now, this mission has left the country, which means there is no UN troop apparently present on Mali's soil. Security experts caution that the region could become a focal point of conflict in the north, with rebel groups and the army competing for control of areas left vacant by the UN, potentially worsening instability in Mali. The UN has announced that only a small team will stay behind to oversee the transportation of assets and the disposal of UN-owned equipment. But why did Mali kick the UN peacekeepers out in the first place? The 13,000-strong mission was deployed by the Security Council in 2013 to help restore stability after al-Qaeda-linked insurgents, and separatists seized control of parts of the desert north in 2012. Despite initial efforts by French forces to push the militants back, they made a resurgence. Nobody knows how and why. Violent attacks continued and spread into neighboring Niger and Burkina Faso, causing thousands of casualties and creating one of the world's fastest-growing humanitarian crises. Approximately 170 peacekeepers lost their lives in the UN mission, the highest among current UN missions. Hence, the need for UN troops increased, but nobody knows whether this was done artificially. MINUSMA was tasked with protecting major cities, mediating conflicts to lessen ethnic disputes in rural areas, and facilitating medical evacuations for Mali's under-equipped army. The mission coordinated peace talks between rival armed groups in the north, following a 2015 peace agreement known as the Algiers Accords. It was involved in organizing elections scheduled for the next year. However, relations with Mali's leaders, who consolidated power through coups in 2020 and 2021, soured. Bamako desired a more active fighting role for MINUSMA, while the UN sought greater freedom of movement. Mali's government was angered by a UN report in May accusing the army and armed white men of killing 500 civilians in the town of Moura last year. On June 16, Mali Foreign Minister Abdoulaye Diop instructed MINUSMA to leave immediately. Before Diop's comments, MINUSMA was expected to renew its mandate for another year. But things were too bad to continue, and the UN voted to call back the mission. Security experts are concerned that MINUSMA's sudden withdrawal will lead to increased chaos in Mali, leaving the army alone with approximately 1,000 Wagner fighters to confront militants. Major towns may become vulnerable to attacks. Signatories of the Algiers Accord fear its potential collapse without UN mediation, leaving the north susceptible to another uprising. International oversight of the conflict, including investigations into alleged abuses by all sides, will likely cease. Despite the presence of UN peacekeepers and French troops leading counter-terror efforts, terror attacks in Mali consistently surged, accompanied by a rise in the number of Malians joining insurgent groups. This proved that despite the UN mission's presence, insurgencies were not significantly decreased. Or perhaps the mission was not taking concrete steps to end all terrorists in a bid to ensure that conflicts stay, so the mission's presence could be legitimized. Russia and China voiced criticism at the UN, and countries like the UK and Sweden declined to contribute troops. French President Emmanuel Macron announced his intention to withdraw French forces last year due to frustrations with military leaders who seized power in 2021, causing delays in democratic elections, and inviting the Russian mercenary group Wagner to supply around 1,000 fighters for security. You see, the Wagner group became a major element. But how many UN troops were in Mali? More than 3,300 UN peacekeepers exited Mali as part of a gradual withdrawal plan outlined in a UN Security Council resolution that mandates the complete cessation of the mission's operations by December 31, 2023. However, it's surprising to know the total number present. As of July 2023, there were 15,000 UN troops present in Mali, going into its roots and controlling the very structure of security. But what's next for Mali now? Well, as the country has been freed from the UN troops, Colonel Goita might plan to take help from the Wagner group. It will be done in a bid to increase military cooperation with Russia. In other words, experts believe that Mali kicked out UN troops to get rid of the controlling force that reported to the West-led UN. Instead, Mali wanted to hire a private military force that could be controlled. Instead of securing Western interests, the Wagner group can work closely with the Malian army, offer better training, and put an end to the decades-long terrorism in the country. Experts also believe that as the UN troops have left, there are chances there will be fewer insurgencies. It's a belief that since there is no conflicting party in the country like the UN troops, whose interests are linked to conflicts, chances are that insurgencies will dissolve over time. What do you think? Did Mali do the right thing by asking UN peacekeepers to leave? Do you believe that the UN troops are peacekeepers in a real sense, or are they just Western troops in disguise? In the comments section right below, let us know your thoughts on what might happen in Mali now that the UN troops have left. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. we have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.